My name is Ignacio, 23 years old, and until last week, I thought I knew what family meant. I was a senior in college, living at home to save money while finishing my degree. My sister Sophia always resented my presence, but I never imagined how far she would go. When she looked my parents in the eyes and said those words, my world collapsed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family stories that will make you think twice about who you can truly trust. Growing up in our modest suburban home, our family consisted of 4 people: my father Thomas, my mother Maria, my younger sister Sophia, who is 19 now, and myself. From the earliest memories I can recall, there was always a subtle imbalance in how affection and attention were distributed in our household. My parents, especially my mother, showered Sophia with love and privilege that seemed disproportionate, even accounting for her being the baby of the family. Being the youngest and the only daughter, Sophia occupied a special place in our family dynamic that I could never quite reach. The pink bedroom with custom furniture, the immediate fulfillment of her requests, the excused tantrums, these were all part of her normal experience growing up. "She's just a little girl, Ignacio," my mother would say whenever I pointed out the disparities. "You need to be the bigger person. You're the older brother." That phrase, "be the bigger person," became the mantra of my childhood. I internalized it to the point where I molded my entire personality around being responsible, reliable, and undemanding. I maintained perfect grades throughout school, took part-time jobs from the age of 16 to contribute to household expenses, and helped with chores without being asked. My father, Thomas, was less obvious in his favoritism. He maintained a facade of neutrality, occasionally acknowledging my achievements, with a brief nod or a pat on the shoulder. But when important decisions were made, he inevitably sided with my mother and Sophia. His conflict-avoidant nature meant that standing up for me would require confronting my mother's obvious bias, something he never found the courage to do. "Your mother knows best," he would tell me privately, after particularly unfair incidents. "Just focus on your studies, son. That's something no one can take from you." When it came time to choose a college, I had scholarship offers from several prestigious universities across the country, but our family was going through financial difficulties after my father's company downsized. Instead of pursuing opportunities farther from home, I chose the local state university with a partial scholarship. This decision allowed me to live at home, save money, and help my parents with bills and household maintenance. At first, Sophia seemed pleased with this arrangement. She was 14 when I started college and enjoyed having her big brother around to help with homework and occasionally give her rides to friends' houses. But as she entered high school and I continued to excel in my studies, her attitude began to change. The first incidents were subtle. My textbooks would mysteriously disappear before important exams, only to be found under her bed or in the back of her closet. I was just borrowing them. She would claim with wide, innocent eyes that my parents always believed. My important papers would get coffee spilled on them. My carefully prepared meals in the refrigerator would vanish, with no one admitting to taking them. The one person who saw through Sophia's behavior was my grandfather, Albert. Dad's father was a straight-talking former construction worker who had built his own successful contracting business through decades of hard work. He lived about 40 minutes away, in a modest house, with a large workshop where he still enjoyed carpentry projects, despite being in his 70s. During my visits to his house, which became more frequent as tensions rose at home, Grandpa Albert would listen to my stories without judgment. Unlike my parents, he never dismissed my concerns or told me I was imagining things. "Some people get jealous when they see others succeeding," he told me once while teaching me how to refinish an old desk he had rescued from a yard sale. "Your sister might be acting out because she's trying to find her own path, but that doesn't make it right for her to tear you down or for your parents to let her." His workshop became my sanctuary, a place where I could speak freely and be heard. The relationship we formed during those weekend visits gave me strength to endure the increasingly hostile environment at home. What I didn't know then was how important this connection would become when everything finally fell apart. The past few months before the blow-up had seen a significant escalation in Sophia's antagonism. As I entered my senior year, things had started falling into place for my future. After years of maintaining a perfect GPA while juggling part-time jobs, I'd been awarded a prestigious scholarship that covered my remaining tuition completely. Additionally, I had secured an interview for a competitive internship at Anderson Financial Group, one of the most respected firms in our region. My accomplishments seemed to trigger something in Sophia. Her hostility shifted from occasional annoyances to what felt like a deliberate campaign to undermine me. One Tuesday evening, I returned from classes to find my laptop screen cracked. It had been perfectly fine when I left that morning, safely stored in my desk drawer. "Maybe you left it on your bed and sat on it," my mother suggested when I brought it up at dinner. "I never put my laptop on my bed," I replied. "And the crack looks like something hit it directly." Sophia pushed her food around her plate. "Why do you always blame me for everything that happens to your stuff? I wasn't even home most of the afternoon. The repair cost $300, money I had been saving for professional clothes for my upcoming interviews." My parents refused to believe Sophia had anything to do with it, despite her being the only other person home that day. A week later, my flash drive containing my senior project disappeared from my desk. After tearing apart my room looking for it, I found it in the bathroom trash can, broken in half. When confronted, Sophia claimed she had no idea how it got there. I lost a week's worth of work that hadn't been backed up. Desperate to resolve the situation, I tried sitting down with Sophia privately. We used to be close when we were younger, and I hoped I could appeal to that former connection. "What's going on, Sophia?" I asked her one afternoon when our parents weren't home. "If I've done something to upset you, can we talk about it? This tension is making it hard for both of us." She looked at me with cold eyes I barely recognized. "Not everything is about you, Ignacio. Maybe I'm just tired of living in the shadow of Mr. Perfect. Do you have any idea what it's like to constantly hear, 'Why can't you be more like your brother?' I've never tried to make you look bad," I said, genuinely surprised. "And I've always helped you when you asked." She laughed bitterly. "That's even worse. Your condescending help just proves how much better you think you are than everyone else." The conversation devolved from there, with Sophia storming out and slamming her door. Later attempts to involve our parents only resulted in them suggesting I was being too sensitive and needed to give Sophia space as she was going through a difficult age. The situation deteriorated further when Sophia began inviting friends over, specifically when I needed quiet time to study. They would blast music, talk loudly outside my door, and leave messes throughout the house that I would often end up cleaning to avoid arguments. More disturbing was discovering that Sophia had been spreading rumors about me to our extended family. At a cousin's birthday party, I overheard my aunt asking my mother if I was doing better now and making comments about how stress can affect mental health. Later conversations revealed that Sophia had told several relatives that I had become controlling and paranoid, making up stories about her damaging my things because of academic pressure. Throughout all this, I maintained my grades and continued preparing for my future, often studying at the library or at Grandpa Albert's house to avoid the toxic atmosphere at home. I tried to keep the peace, remembering my father's words about focusing on what no one could take from me. I had no idea how prophetic those words would become, or how soon they would be tested. The day before my interview at Anderson Financial Group, I was more prepared than I had ever been for anything in my life. I had researched the company extensively, practiced potential interview questions, and prepared a presentation showcasing my analysis of their recent market expansion. Everything was saved on my laptop and backed up to an external hard drive that I kept in my desk. I spent the evening ironing my best shirt and polishing my only pair of dress shoes until they gleamed. The interview was scheduled for 9 in the morning, which meant navigating rush hour traffic, so I planned to leave by 7:30 to ensure I arrived with time to spare. After setting 3 separate alarms, I finally fell asleep around midnight, confident and ready. The disaster struck when I woke up at 5:30 and decided to review my presentation one last time before getting ready. When I opened my laptop and tried to access the files, I found that everything was gone. Not just the presentation, but all my interview prep materials, resume versions, and the portfolio of projects I had compiled to showcase my skills. The entire folder had been deleted. Panicking, I reached for my external hard drive only to discover it was missing from my desk drawer. After frantically searching my room, I found it in my trash can, physically damaged with clear signs that someone had deliberately broken it. There was no question in my mind who was responsible. With my heart pounding, I marched to Sophia's room and knocked loudly. When she answered, bleary-eyed and irritated, I held up the damaged hard drive. "Why would you do this?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Do you have any idea how important today is for me?" Sophia's expression shifted from sleepy confusion to defensive anger in seconds. "What are you talking about? I didn't touch your stupid computer stuff. Maybe you should be more careful with your things instead of always blaming me." "This wasn't an accident, Sophia. The files were deliberately deleted and the hard drive was physically broken. You're the only other person who has access to my room." "You're being paranoid again," she said, rolling her eyes. "Mom and Dad are right about you needing help." Our raised voices brought our parents to the hallway. My mother immediately went to Sophia's side, placing an arm protectively around her shoulders. "What's going on? Why are you yelling at your sister so early in the morning?" she demanded. I explained the situation, showing them the damaged hard drive and describing the deleted files. "I have my interview today. Everything I prepared is gone." My father frowned. "Are you sure you didn't accidentally delete the files yourself? Sometimes when people are stressed." "Dad, I didn't accidentally break my own hard drive and throw it in the trash," I said, frustration mounting. "This has been happening for months. My things get damaged, my work gets sabotaged, and nobody in this house seems to care." "Here we go again," Sophia said, her voice trembling in a way I recognized as her preparing to cry on cue. "He always blames me for everything. I can't do anything right in his eyes. I found the hard drive broken in my trash can," I shouted, finally losing my composure. "Who else would have done it?" "Don't you dare raise your voice at your sister," my mother snapped. "She said she didn't do it, and that should be enough." In that moment, something broke inside me. Years of swallowing injustice, of being told to be the bigger person, of watching Sophia manipulate our parents into believing her lies, it all came pouring out. "It's never enough. She's been sabotaging me for years, and you both enable her. She ruined my textbooks, she borrowed money from my wallet, she deliberately makes noise when I'm studying, and now she's destroyed materials for the most important interview of my life. And you still take her side." My parents looked shocked at my outburst. Sophia seized the opportunity and began sobbing dramatically, burying her face in our mother's shoulder. "I can't take this anymore," she wailed. "He hates me and makes up these horrible accusations. I don't feel safe with him here." She looked up at our parents with tears streaming down her face and said the words that would change everything. "I want him gone. Either he leaves or I do." The silence that followed was deafening. I expected my parents to finally see through her manipulation, to recognize the ultimatum as the childish power play it was. Instead, my father cleared his throat and looked at me with cold detachment I had never seen before. "Ignacio, I think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay for a while. This situation has obviously become untenable." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're kicking me out? Because she demanded it?" "We're not kicking you out," my mother said quickly. "We just think everyone needs space to cool down. You're an adult now, and maybe it's time you lived independently." The night before my interview, when I have nowhere to go, I looked from one parent to the other, searching for any sign of the people who had raised me. "Are you serious right now? You can stay with friends for a few days until we sort things out," my father suggested, not meeting my eyes. "You mean until you figure out how to tell me not to come back without feeling guilty?" I said, the truth dawning on me with painful clarity. "Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You're choosing her. You've always chosen her." No one contradicted me. Sophia had stopped crying and was watching the scene with barely concealed satisfaction. "Fine," I said finally. "I'll pack my things." I returned to my room and began throwing clothes into my old duffel bag, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Through the thin walls, I could hear my parents comforting Sophia, reassuring her that everything would be all right now. As I packed, the reality of my situation hit me. I had less than $500 in my checking account. It was the middle of winter, with temperatures dropping below freezing at night. Most of my friends lived in dorms with strict visitor policies or shared apartments where a sudden guest wouldn't be welcome. And I still had that interview in the morning, an interview I was now completely unprepared for. When I emerged from my room with my duffel bag and backpack, my family was sitting in the living room watching TV, as if nothing had happened. No one spoke as I walked to the door. No one asked where I would go. No one said goodbye. As I put my bags in my old car, a 15-year-old sedan I had purchased with my own savings, I realized there was only one place I could go. Only one person who had consistently been in my corner. I started the engine and headed toward the one sanctuary I had left, Grandpa Albert's house. The drive to Grandpa Albert's house took longer than usual. The normally 40-minute journey stretched to over an hour as I navigated through the darkness with tears blurring my vision, forcing me to pull over twice to collect myself. The temperature gauge on my dashboard showed 28 degrees, and light snow had begun to fall by the time I turned onto his gravel driveway. It was nearly 11 at night when I knocked on his door, something I had never done so late before. Despite the hour, lights were still on inside, and it took only moments for Grandpa to answer. He was dressed in flannel pajama pants and an old sweater, reading glasses perched on his nose, a book in his hand. His expression shifted from surprise to concern as he took in my red eyes and the bags at my feet. "Ignacio? What's happened, son?" he asked, immediately stepping aside to let me in. The warmth of his house enveloped me, the familiar scent of wood polish and coffee providing an immediate comfort. In his living room, a fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the old leather armchair where he had told me countless stories through the years waited like an old friend. "They kicked me out," I said simply, my voice breaking on the last word. "Sophia told them she wanted me gone, and they chose her, again." Grandpa Albert's face darkened with anger, but he kept his voice gentle. "Come in and sit down. Tell me everything." Over the next hour, I poured out the whole story, the escalating sabotage, the deleted files and broken hard drive, the confrontation, and finally, my parents' decision to send me away with nowhere to go. Throughout my account, Grandpa listened without interrupting, his weathered hands occasionally clenching into fists, but his eyes remaining focused and attentive. When I finished, the emotional dam broke completely. Years of pretending everything was fine, of swallowing hurt and injustice, came pouring out in heaving sobs that I couldn't control. Grandpa moved to sit beside me on the couch, his arm around my shoulders like when I was a child. "Let it out, son," he said quietly. "You've been holding on to this for too long." After my tears finally subsided, he brought me a glass of water and sat across from me, his expression grave. "I've watched this situation develop for years," he said. "I kept hoping Thomas would find his backbone and Maria would see what was happening under her nose. But they've both been blind, willfully blind to how they've treated you compared to your sister." He stood up and paced in front of the fireplace, his normally stooped posture straightening with resolve. "What they did tonight is unforgivable," he continued. "Throwing their son out into the cold with nowhere to go? Over a teenage girl's tantrum? No, this ends now." There was something in his voice I had never heard before, a steel that went beyond ordinary anger or disappointment. "There's something you need to know, Ignacio. Something I've kept quiet about for your father's sake, but I see now that my silence has only enabled their behavior." He walked to a wooden secretary desk in the corner of the room and unlocked the bottom drawer with a small key he kept on his keychain. From inside he withdrew a folder of documents and brought them back to where Saturday. 10 years ago, when you were 13, your father's company went through major layoffs. Thomas wasn't just having financial difficulties like they told you he was underwater on the mortgage, had maxed out credit cards, and was 3 months behind on payments. They were weeks away from foreclosure. I stared at him, trying to process this information that contradicted everything I had been told about that period in our family's life. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Your parents were too proud," Grandpa said, "and they wanted to protect you kids from worrying, but the situation was dire. Thomas came to me for help, not a loan, but advice on filing for bankruptcy." He handed me the folder. Inside were property deeds, mortgage documents, and legal papers. As I scanned them, one fact became immediately clear. Grandpa Albert was listed as the owner of my parents' house. "I couldn't let them lose their home," he explained. "So I paid off their mortgage and legally purchased the house from them. We agreed that they would live there rent-free, paying only the property taxes and utilities until they got back on their feet. He shook his head sadly. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but years passed, and Thomas never mentioned taking the house back or paying me for it. He and Maria have been living in my house all this time, pretending to everyone, even you kids, that it's still theirs. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The house I had grown up in, the home I had just been expelled from, didn't even belong to my parents. All these years, they had maintained the fiction of home ownership while living on Grandpa's generosity. "Does Dad know you're showing me this?" I asked. Grandpa Albert's expression hardened. "At this point, I don't care if he knows. What they did tonight crossed a line. They've forgotten not just gratitude, but basic human decency toward their own son." He sat down heavily in his armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. "I've been too soft, letting them maintain their pride at the expense of honesty. But now I see that my kindness has allowed them to develop a warped sense of entitlement, the very thing they've fostered in your sister." Looking me directly in the eyes, he continued, "Tomorrow morning, we're going to make some changes. It's time Thomas and Maria remembered who actually owns that roof over their heads and what real family loyalty looks like." "What are you going to do?" I asked, both fearful and curious. "I'm going to remind them of our arrangement," he said simply, "and I'm going to give them a taste of what they just did to you. But don't worry, unlike them, I have a plan to make this right, not just tear things apart." That night, I slept in the guest room that had gradually accumulated my belongings over years of weekend visits, clothes in the dresser, books on the shelves, even my own toothbrush in the bathroom. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that while my parents' house had never truly felt like my space, this room had always been mine without question or condition. For the first time since the confrontation, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever happened next, I knew I wasn't alone. And sometimes, having one person truly in your corner is enough to change everything. The next morning I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind before the events of the previous night came rushing back. My interview at Anderson Financial Group, I had completely forgotten about it in the emotional chaos. I checked my phone. 7:15 a.m. The interview was at 9. With no presentation and no portfolio, going seemed pointless, but the thought of giving up without trying felt even worse. When I emerged from the guest room, Grandpa Albert was already dressed and sitting at his kitchen table with a notepad and his old flip phone beside him. "Good morning," he said, pushing a mug of coffee toward me. "I figured you'd be up early. Big day." "I still have that interview," I explained, "but all my materials were deleted. I'm thinking of calling to reschedule, but I'm not sure they'll allow it." "Go anyway," Grandpa said firmly. "Explain the situation honestly, not the family drama, but that your presentation was lost due to a technical issue. Show them how you handle adversity. That tells them more about your character than any prepared speech." His advice made sense. I quickly showered and dressed in the clothes I had packed. They were slightly wrinkled from being stuffed in my duffel bag, but presentable enough. "I'll be back this afternoon," I told Grandpa, as I prepared to leave. "Thank you again for taking me in last night. This is your home too, Ignacio. Always has been." He paused, then added, "When you return, we'll make that call to your parents. I think it's best if you're here for it." The interview went better than I could have expected under the circumstances. I explained to the hiring committee that I had experienced a data loss incident the night before and asked if I could walk them through what my presentation would have shown instead. They agreed, and I spent the next hour demonstrating my knowledge of their company and answering their questions with as much confidence as I could muster. "Resilience and adaptability are qualities we value highly," the senior partner told me as we concluded. "We'll be in touch next week." By the time I returned to Grandpa's house, it was just past noon. I found him in his workshop, methodically sanding a piece of wood that would eventually become part of a rocking chair he was building. "How did it go?" he asked, setting aside his tools. "Better than expected," I replied. "They seemed impressed that I showed up at all after losing my materials." He nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, are you ready for the next challenge?" Inside the house, Grandpa Albert placed his phone on the kitchen table and put it on speaker mode before dialing my father's number. It rang 3 times before Dad answered. "Dad? What's up?" "Thomas," Grandpa said, his voice calm but cold in a way I had never heard before. "I'm calling about Ignacio. He showed up at my door last night with nowhere else to go." There was a pause before my father responded, his voice defensive. "We had a situation here. Sophia was upset." "I know exactly what happened," Grandpa interrupted. "Ignacio told me everything. What I want to know is how you and Maria could throw your own son out with no warning and nowhere to go." "It's not like that," Dad protested. "We just needed some space to cool down. He could have stayed with friends." "In the middle of winter? At 11 at night? With an important interview the next morning? After his sister deliberately sabotaged his work?" I could hear my father sigh on the other end. "Dad, you don't understand the dynamics here. Sophia has been feeling—" "Put Maria on the phone too," Grandpa said sharply. "I want both of you to hear what I have to say." There was muffled conversation in the background before my mother's voice joined the call. "Albert? What's going on?" "I'm going to say this once," Grandpa began, his voice steady and authoritative. "I am deeply disappointed in both of you. For years I've watched you favor Sophia while expecting Ignacio to be the responsible one, the forgiving one, the one who never complains no matter how unfairly he's treated. I said nothing because I didn't want to interfere in how you raised your children. That was my mistake." Neither of my parents spoke, but I could almost feel their tension through the phone. "Ignacio has been nothing but supportive of your family," Grandpa continued. "He chose a local college to save money and help with bills. He's maintained perfect grades while working part-time. He's been patient with his sister's jealousy and your blind eye to her behavior. And how do you repay him? By throwing him out when he finally stands up for himself." "Albert, we didn't throw him out permanently," my mother said, her voice tight. "We just needed a cooling-off period." "Don't lie to me, Maria," Grandpa snapped. "You made no arrangements for where he would go. You didn't even ask if he had enough money for a hotel. You didn't call to check if he arrived safely somewhere. Your actions show exactly what you intended." Another uncomfortable silence filled the line before my father spoke again. "Dad, I understand you're upset, but this is between us and Ignacio. We'll sort it out as a family." "That's where you're wrong, Thomas. This became my business the moment you forgot who owns the house you're living in." The stunned silence that followed told me my parents hadn't expected this direction. "What are you talking about?" my mother finally asked. "The house. Your house. My house. Actually, as the deed and mortgage clearly show. The house I purchased 10 years ago when you were facing foreclosure. The house you've been living in rent-free all this time while pretending to everyone, including your children, that it still belongs to you." "Dad," my father said, his voice suddenly shaky. "We agreed that arrangement was private, and you agreed it was temporary," Grandpa countered. "Yet here we are, a decade later, and you've never once mentioned taking back ownership or reimbursing me." "That's fine, I never expected the money back. What I did expect was gratitude and decent treatment of both your children." I could hear my mother starting to cry. "Albert, please, we didn't mean—" "You have 1 week," Grandpa interrupted, his voice firm. 1 week to pack your things and leave my house." The shock on the other end of the line was palpable. "You can't be serious," my father stammered. "Where would we go? We don't have savings for a deposit on another place." "Should have thought of that before you put your own son in exactly the same position, shouldn't you?" Grandpa replied coldly. "But what about Sophia?" my mother asked desperately. "She's still in high school. We can't just uproot her." "You should have considered that before allowing her to demand Ignacio's removal," Grandpa said. 1 week. I'll be by on Saturday to check your progress." With that, he ended the call. The kitchen fell into silence as the gravity of what had just happened settled over us. "Did you really mean that?" I asked finally. "About making them leave in a week?" Grandpa Albert's stern expression softened as he looked at me. "Not entirely, no. I wouldn't actually put them on the street. I'm not cruel like they were to you. But they don't know that yet." He sat down at the table across from me. "What they did was wrong on every level, Ignacio. As parents, as decent human beings, and especially considering the fact that they don't even own that house. They needed a serious wake-up call. "What's the real plan, then?" I asked. "The plan is to let them sweat for a few days. Let them experience the panic and uncertainty they inflicted on you. Then, when I go over on Saturday, I'll lay out some conditions. First, a formal apology to you. Second, acknowledgement of Sophia's behavior and consequences for her actions. Third, family counseling to address the dysfunction that's been allowed to fester." He reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over mine. "In the meantime, you'll stay here with me. I've been thinking of converting the workshop attachment into a small apartment for years. This is the perfect opportunity. You can have your own space, finish your degree, and start your career without their drama holding you back." The relief that washed over me was immense, not just because I had a place to stay, but because, for the first time in years, someone was standing up for me, acknowledging the unfairness I had endured. "What if they refuse your conditions?" I asked. Grandpa smiled grimly. "Then they'll discover I wasn't bluffing about the house. I'd rather not take it that far, but I will if necessary. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way." As we sat discussing the details of his plan, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but alongside them grew a new sensation, the quiet strength that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Whatever happened with my family going forward, I would never again be the one who silently accepted mistreatment in the name of keeping peace. The week passed in a strange mix of tension and calm. I stayed with Grandpa Albert, helping him in his workshop during the hours I wasn't studying or applying for post-graduation jobs. My parents called my phone multiple times each day, but I followed Grandpa's advice and let the calls go to voicemail. Their messages evolved from defensive explanations to increasingly desperate pleas as the reality of their situation sank in. On Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after the phone call, Grandpa and I drove to my parents' house, his house, legally speaking, to follow through on his ultimatum. We pulled into the driveway just before 10 in the morning to find my father's car and mother's minivan both parked out front, a clear indication they were waiting for us. "Remember," Grandpa said as we sat in his truck gathering our thoughts, "no matter what happens in there, you have nothing to apologize for. Stand your ground." The front door opened before we reached it. My father stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His normally neat appearance was disheveled, with stubble on his chin and dark circles under his eyes. "Dad, Ignacio," he greeted us with visible relief. "Come in, please." The living room had been cleaned meticulously, with my mother perched nervously on the edge of the sofa. What surprised me was seeing Sophia sitting in the armchair by the window, her usual confident posture replaced by something more subdued. No one spoke for a long moment after we entered. The air felt thick with unspoken words and emotions. "Well," Grandpa finally broke the silence, "I see you're all still here. Have you started packing?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Albert, please. We need to talk about this reasonably." "I believe I was quite reasonable on the phone," Grandpa replied, remaining standing even as my father gestured toward the empty seats. "I gave you a full week, which is more consideration than you gave Ignacio." My father stepped forward. "We made a terrible mistake. We know that now. But surely there's a solution that doesn't involve uprooting our entire family." "There is," Grandpa agreed. "But it requires more than just words. It requires acknowledging what's been happening in this house for years and making real changes." He set his car keys on the coffee table with deliberate slowness. "For you to keep living in my house, there are conditions. First, a genuine apology to Ignacio, not excuses, not justifications, but a real recognition of how you've failed him. Second, Sophia needs to face consequences for her actions. And third, this family needs professional help to address the dysfunction that's been allowed to fester." My father looked down at his hands, then back up at Grandpa and me. Something in his expression had changed. The defensiveness was gone, replaced by what looked like genuine shame. "You're right," he said quietly. "About all of it." He turned to face me directly. "Ignacio, I failed you as a father, not just that night, but for years before it. I took the path of least resistance, siding with your mother and Sophia because it was easier than standing up for what was right. I convinced myself I was keeping the peace, but all I was doing was teaching you that your feelings didn't matter as much as theirs. The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the practiced, political non-apology I had expected. I let my own insecurities about providing for this family cloud my judgment, he continued. After nearly losing the house, I felt like less of a man, less of a father. Your mother's approval became even more important to me, and she's always favored Sophia. It was wrong, and you deserved better. My mother, who had been silently crying, finally spoke. I don't know if I can be as eloquent as your father, she said, her voice wavering. But he's right. We failed you, Ignacio. I failed you. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I've always found it easier to connect with Sophia. She's more like me, more emotional, more expressive. You've always been so self-sufficient, so capable, that I told myself you didn't need as much from me. That was my excuse for giving you less attention, less support, less defense when conflicts arose. She looked down at her hands. But the truth is, I've been unfair. I saw what I wanted to see with Sophia, and I ignored what was inconvenient. I convinced myself her behavior wasn't as bad as you claimed, because facing that truth would mean facing my own failure as a mother. Their words were everything I had wanted to hear for years, yet now that the moment had arrived, I found myself uncertain how to respond. Part of me wanted to embrace their apology immediately, to rush back into the comfort of believing my family could heal. Another part remained wary, remembering countless previous disappointments. Before I could formulate a response, movement from the corner of the room caught my attention. Sophia had risen from her chair and was approaching me, her face a mix of defiance and vulnerability I had never seen before. In her hands was a USB drive. "This is yours," she said, holding it out to me. "It's a backup of all your files from that night. I never deleted them from your computer. I just moved them to a hidden folder and made it look like they were gone. And I switched your hard drive with a broken one from my drawer." I stared at her, processing this information. "Why would you keep a backup if you wanted to sabotage me?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I don't know. I guess. I wanted to hurt you, but not ruin you completely. I was going to slip it into your bag the next day after you'd already missed your interview." She finally looked up. "I didn't think they would actually kick you out." "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said, taking the USB drive. "You deliberately tried to sabotage something you knew was important to me." "I know," she admitted. "I've been terrible to you, and there's no good reason for it. Just stupid, petty jealousy." She took a deep breath. "You make everything look so easy. School, jobs, making mom and dad proud. You never seem to struggle or mess up. Do you have any idea what it's like trying to follow that? To always be compared and found wanting?" "I never asked to be held up as an example," I responded. "And things weren't easy for me either. I just didn't complain because I knew nobody would listen." "I'm listening now," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry. Not just for the files, but for everything. The borrowed textbooks, the noise when you were studying, the rumors to the family, all of it." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. This wasn't the manipulative Sophia I was used to. This was something new, perhaps the first genuine interaction we had shared in years. Grandpa Albert cleared his throat. "This is a start," he said, "but words need to be followed by actions. Thomas, Maria, are you prepared to make real changes in how this family functions?" My father nodded firmly. "We've already contacted a family therapist. We have an appointment set up for next week, all four of us, if Ignacio is willing." "And Sophia," Grandpa continued, turning to my sister, "there need to be consequences for your actions. Have your parents discussed this with you?" "They have," she replied, the old defiance flashing briefly before subsiding. "My car privileges are revoked for 3 months. My phone is for emergency use only. And I'm required to volunteer at the community center every weekend until graduation." She hesitated, then added, "It's fair. More than fair, actually." The conversation continued for hours, with painful truths being excavated and examined from all sides. Old wounds were reopened, but this time with the intention of cleaning them properly so they could finally heal. Throughout it all, Grandpa Albert remained a steady presence, guiding the discussion when it threatened to veer into blame or defensiveness. By late afternoon, we had reached an understanding. My parents would keep the house, but with formalized conditions about how all family members would be treated going forward. Sophia would face consequences for her actions, while being given the opportunity to rebuild trust. And I faced the most difficult decision of all: whether to move back home or maintain the independence I had begun to establish at Grandpa's house. As we prepared to leave, my mother asked the question directly, "Will you come home, Ignacio?" I looked around the house that had been both haven and battlefield throughout my life. "I need time to think about it," I said honestly. "This isn't something I can decide today." She nodded, disappointment visible but restrained. "We understand. Your room is here whenever you're ready." As Grandpa and I drove back to his house, I felt lighter than I had in years, despite the weight of the decision before me. Whatever choice I made would be mine alone, not dictated by obligation or guilt, or the need to keep peace at my own expense. "You handled that well," Grandpa said as we turned onto his street. "Better than most adults twice your age would have." "I learned from the best," I replied, earning a rare smile from him. That night, as I sat in the guest room, my room, as Grandpa insisted on calling it, I realized that sometimes losing what you thought was home leads you to where you truly belong. And sometimes the family you need isn't always the one you were born into, but the one that stands by you when everything falls apart. After considerable reflection, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I would not return to my parents' house permanently. Instead, I accepted Grandpa Albert's offer to convert his workshop attachment into a small apartment where I could live independently while finishing my senior year. This choice wasn't made from anger or resentment, but from the recognition that I needed space to heal and grow on my own terms. "Your room at home will always be there if you change your mind," my mother said when I told them my decision, disappointment evident in her voice, but tempered with a new respect for my autonomy. "This isn't about rejecting you," I explained. "It's about giving our family the space to rebuild properly, without falling back into old patterns too quickly." Over the following weeks, we established new boundaries. I visited for Sunday dinners and participated in the weekly family therapy sessions that had become a non-negotiable part of our healing process. These sessions were often uncomfortable, with buried feelings resurfacing and hard truths being acknowledged, but they were necessary excavations of the dysfunction that had taken root in our family. Sophia's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. Without an audience to perform for, her manipulative behaviors gradually subsided. Our therapist helped her understand how her feelings of inadequacy had manifested as jealousy and sabotage, and she began channeling her energies more constructively. Her volunteer work at the community center, initially imposed as a punishment, evolved into a genuine passion as she discovered her talent for working with children. "They don't compare me to anyone else," she explained during one of our tentative one-on-one conversations. "They just like me for who I am." My parents, too, were making efforts to change. My father became more assertive in family decisions, no longer defaulting to the path of least resistance. My mother worked on recognizing her biases and treating us more equitably. They weren't perfect. Decades of habits don't disappear overnight, but their commitment to improvement was genuine. Meanwhile, I focused on finishing my degree and building my future. To my surprise, Anderson Financial Group called 2 weeks after my improvised interview with an offer for their internship program, citing my exceptional ability to perform under pressure as a deciding factor. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophia's attempt to sabotage my opportunity had inadvertently showcased my resilience. Grandpa Albert supervised the conversion of his workshop attachment himself, hiring professionals for the electrical and plumbing work, but handling much of the carpentry personally despite his age. Together, we transformed the space into a compact but comfortable studio apartment with a separate entrance, giving me true independence for the first time in my life. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," he told me as we installed the final shelves. "But something tells me you'll be ready to spread your wings wider before long." He was right, as he so often was. With graduation approaching, I had already received 3 job offers, including a permanent position at Anderson Financial. The future I had worked so hard for was materializing before my eyes, no longer undermined by family drama or sabotage. 6 months after that fateful night when I was thrown out of my parents' house, I stood on the university stage in cap and gown, accepting my diploma with highest honors. Looking out into the audience, I saw something I hadn't dared hope for: my entire family sitting together, genuinely proud and supportive. Grandpa Albert sat in the front row, his weathered face beaming with pride. Beside him were my parents, who had taken the day off work to attend despite it being a Wednesday. And next to them, somewhat awkwardly, but present nonetheless, was Sophia, who had created a handmade card congratulating me on my achievement, the first unprompted kind gesture from her in years. After the ceremony, as we gathered for photos, Grandpa pulled me aside and handed me an envelope. "A graduation gift," he said simply. Inside was a legal document, a deed transferring 25% ownership of my parents' house, his house, to my name. "What is this?" I asked, stunned. "Insurance," he replied with a wink. "And recognition. That house is part of your legacy too, regardless of how things played out. This ensures you always have a stake in it, always have a place to return to if needed." I was speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift and its symbolic significance. "Don't tell your parents just yet," he added. "I'll break that news when the time is right. Today is for celebrating." And celebrate we did, with a family dinner that felt more genuine than any gathering I could remember. The conversations weren't perfect or problem-free, but they were honest in a way they had never been before. We were learning, slowly but surely, how to be a real family, instead of just people who shared a house and a last name. As I reflect on the journey that began with those devastating words, "I want him gone," I realize that sometimes the most painful rejections lead us to our most important revelations. Being kicked out of what I thought was my home forced me to discover what home truly means. Not just a physical space, but a place where you are valued, respected, and loved unconditionally. The greatest lesson I've learned through all of this is that self-worth cannot be dependent on others' validation. For years I sought approval from parents who were incapable of giving it equally. I measured my value by how much I could endure without complaint. But true strength isn't found in silent suffering, it's found in having the courage to stand up for yourself, to set boundaries, and sometimes to walk away from situations that diminish you. Forgiveness, I've discovered, doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the hurt never happened. It means choosing not to let that hurt control your future. I've forgiven my family not for their sake, but for mine, because carrying resentment only weighs down the carrier, never the target. Today, as I prepare to start my new job and move into my own apartment in the city, I do so not as someone escaping a toxic situation, but as someone stepping confidently toward a future of my own design. The foundation of that confidence was laid in Grandpa Albert's workshop, rebuilt from the rubble of family expectations and conditional acceptance. If you're facing your own family struggles or feeling undervalued by those who should support you most, remember that your worth isn't determined by their ability to see it. Sometimes the family we find, or the one person who truly believes in us, matters more than the family we were born into. And sometimes, being forced to leave is the first step toward finding where you truly belong. What family challenges have you overcome in your life? How did they shape who you've become? Leave a comment below sharing your experience. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience, and share with someone who might be struggling with their own family dynamics. Thank you for listening. And remember, the family that matters most is the one that shows up for you when it counts.